What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and I'm back for another Demon Souls video. So last week I posted my entire Twitch walkthrough that took me several streams over the course of a couple of months to complete. I posted that in one video, but the catch was every time I died, I fast forwarded a little bit. So through editing and fast forwarding, I was able to take almost 30 hours worth of streaming and cut it into basically an hour video. So it was a pretty cool video, if I do say so myself. I don't mean to pat myself on the back too hard, but since I'm done with that video and this game is known for its intense boss battles, I figured I would do something I've literally never done before, and that is put these bosses in a tier list. So without further ado, let's rock. So before we get started, I've mentioned this on stream before, but I am a noob to Soulsborne games. I've played a few of them, but this Demon Souls remake was the first Soulsborne game that I have beaten from start to finish. So if you're looking for a tier list that breaks down all of these bosses in comparison to other Soulsborne bosses, this is definitely not the video for you. Also, I'm using somebody else's tier list on this website. I'm not super familiar with this tier list website. I've never done one of these types of videos before, so it's all brand new to me. They did include the red and blue dragon, which I don't consider a boss, but I didn't put enough time and effort into taking them off, so we're just kind of ignore that for the time being. I'm not going to rank them. Also, I put it in order that I'm going to talk about these bosses, which is the order in which I came across them. I know there's kind of like a preferred path that you're supposed to take in this game, but since I'm a noob to this game in Soulsborne games, I wasn't sure of that path. So basically the way that I came across each one of these bosses is I tried to do the logical thing, at least what I thought was the logical thing, and try to beat an entire Archstone. If I couldn't beat that Archstone, for example, like the first one, you can't beat the third area until you had beaten Archdemon. So I had to then skip to the second Archstone. And if I got to the point with, best example is Maneater, when I got to Maneater, I couldn't beat him for a very long time. Then I would kind of bounce around. So it's not going to be the preferred path. I'm not going to talk about these in the correct order, but I'm just going to kind of bounce around and talk about them as I came across them. All right, so the first boss that I'm going to talk about is Vanguard, and I'm going to be pretty quick with this one. He's the typical Soulsborne tutorial boss. You're not supposed to beat him. He's supposed to kill you so he can teach you about the Nexus and Souls form and all that good stuff. He is a big boy and he hits really, really hard. I actually don't know if he hits hard or if you're just so weak because it's the beginning, the very beginning of the game, but he does one-shot you essentially in this point of the game. And I know that there's a cheese method that if you can get behind him and hit him in the butt, you kind of clap those cheeks for a while, he does go down pretty easily. It just takes a little bit of patience, but he's a big boy, like I said, and the level is designed in a way, there's like these columns and it's kind of like this narrow room, and he kind of takes up the entire size of the room. It's very difficult to get behind him, and I could never pull it off, but I do know that it's kind of easy to beat him if you can getting behind him. That's literally the hardest part of that boss battle. But again, he's a tutorial boss. He's supposed to kill you. So that being said, I don't think that he's a great boss. They probably didn't put a ton of time into his design just because he's a tutorial boss, so he's supposed to beat you. So I'm going to put him in C tier, but it would be kind of, I'm not going to give every one of these bosses a particular grade, but it's probably going to end up being like a low C tier with Vanguard. So the first real boss that you're going to come across, and everybody's going to come across this boss first because you can't skip around until after you beat Phalanx. And honestly, I was super psyched to get to my first real Demon Souls boss, because again, Vanguard kicked my ass in like one hit, so there was no fight there whatsoever. And I had heard such great things about this game as a whole, but especially these bosses. That's what Soulsborne games are all about, is these epic boss battles. And it took me a while to get to Phalanx, the first boss, and I was very disappointed because it was such an easy boss battle. He's basically just this big blob, so the design of the boss is kind of disappointing. He has like these little mini-me blobs that have shields and spears, but once you take care of them, the big boss is very, very easy. And when I first decided to do this video, I was thinking Phalanx is F tier for sure. But then the more I thought about it, the more I didn't want this video and this list just to be about how difficult the boss is. I wanted to talk about all aspects of the boss. And one thing that I've come across with these Soulsborne games, why I think they're some of the more difficult games out there, and they're kind of notorious for being so difficult, is because we're so used as gamers that the game is just going to tell us exactly what we're supposed to do. I've been streaming The Last of Us Part 1 remake recently, and it seems like the hints are so quick. Like if I don't do exactly what the game wants me to do immediately, it's going to tell me the hint. It's going to give me that option. And so games nowadays just tell you exactly what you're supposed to do. And this game is pretty difficult because it doesn't do that thing. But it kind of does if you're paying attention. It just doesn't explicitly tell you what to do all the time. So one of the reasons why Phalanx was so easy for me and why I was kind of disappointed the first time that I fought him was because I was able to beat him so quickly because I had all these fire bombs and I had this pine resin, and I just basically was able to beat him up with that stuff. Well, I knew to use that because it kept giving it to me. As I was making my way through that level leading up to Phalanx, the enemies that I was killing were dropping all of this stuff. So I was like, well, this must be important. And so the game was telling me what to do without explicitly telling me what to do. And I thought that was really cool. So that taught me the lesson from then on. Hey, pay attention to what the game is trying to tell you, and it'll be a lot easier. It didn't always work out for me, but I thought that that was a really important lesson that this boss taught me. I'm not saying that Phalanx is a great boss, but it's not terrible. It's not F tier because it does teach you that important lesson. So I'm going to put Phalanx as D tier, which is surprising because, again, I thought for sure as soon as I started doing this list, he was going to be F. But again, I want to talk about it in the context of the overall game. All right, so next boss I want to talk about is Tower Knight. And Tower Knight's basically the second boss most people are going to come across. Third if you count Vanguard. And honestly, I was a little cocky after Phalanx. I was able to beat him in one try. And as this game does throughout, once you start feeling cocky, the game has a way of knocking you back down a peg or two. And that's definitely what Tower Knight did for me. It took me several attempts to beat him. So like Vanguard, Tower Knight is a big boy. It's basically just a giant knight, as his name would suggest. And there are archers up top, which now that I've played the game from start to finish, I realized that the archers up top on Tower Knight is kind of the developer's way of acknowledging that he's not the most difficult boss, because I definitely do think that the developers take a lot of consideration into kind of balancing how difficult the bosses are. And so I definitely think that the archers up top are just kind of their way of making Tower Knight a little bit more difficult. And because it took me several attempts to beat him, it got to a point where the archers were just kind of more annoying. It was just like a thing I had to check off my list before I actually got to fight the boss, the actual boss. And honestly, it's pretty obvious what you're supposed to do against Tower Knight, because he's just this giant knight with this big shield and big spear. You obviously need to get behind him and chop at his ankles. You're kind of a medieval lumberjack in that sense. And it was honestly one of those situations where I struggled with him because I was new at the game. If I got another shot at Tower Knight, I bet I could beat him in the first try because I know what I'm supposed to do. It's pretty obvious what you're supposed to do. And I'm also just really good at the game. But at this point, I was not good at the game. And so for me, I was doing a thing that I think all noobs do, which is, if you know anything about this game, you know that one thing you're supposed to do is roll away from enemy attacks. You're supposed to kind of be patient with these boss battles, kind of roll away, block, and then go in when you're supposed to attack. And it's pretty obvious when you're supposed to attack Tower Knight, because he does that big shield move where he kind of slams it down and it stuns him a little bit, and that gives you an opportunity. But what I was doing is when he would raise up his shield and go to slam it down, I was rolling. And that would actually put too much distance in between me and Tower Knight. And so a lot of times I would have to run, get maybe 1 or 2 hits in, and then if I was greedy and try to get like that 3rd or 4th hit in, that's when he would hit me and I would die a lot of times. And so for me, Tower Knight, kind of like Phalanx, did teach me a lesson on how to play this game. Sometimes it's best to just kind of take a couple of steps back instead of rolling every time, and then you can actually do more damage. So for me, Tower Knight was a little bit more difficult because I'm a noob and I didn't know what I was doing, and I was doing the typical noob thing where I was rolling off away from every attack, which is nice sometimes, but not always. Don't get me wrong, I still like Tower Knight. I just think that now that I've beaten the game from start to finish, he's not my favorite. So I would say that he is definitely above Vanguard, but I would kind of give him like the C+ treatment. So this next boss I'm a little bit nervous to talk about, because from what I understand, Armor Spider is kind of a fan favorite, and I understand because it's a very, very cool boss. The level design is awesome. There's this narrow hallway and the spider can hit you with these devastating fire attacks before you even get close. And on a personal note, I love spiders. They're so fucking cool. I had a pet rose hair tarantula in college, so I was really excited to get to this boss because I thought it was going to be a really cool experience. Unfortunately, my experience fighting the boss was kind of forgettable, and that is my own fault. It has nothing to do with the boss whatsoever. I cheesed it. By this point at the game, I was overusing my soul arrow, and it just so happens that Armor Spider is vulnerable to magic attacks, and so I kind of hid in a corner and just cheesed it as I shot soul arrows, and I killed it on my first try, and it was super, super easy. And honestly, if I were to play this game over again, which is definitely in the realm of possibility, I may just go with the melee attack. Even though I know I could kill it easily with magic attacks, I would rather just try to fight it straight up. I'm a little disappointed in myself, but at the time, I didn't want to keep getting killed over and over again like I was with Tower Knight. And so I was feeling a little bit self-conscious about my efforts. And so I was like, you know what? It's vulnerable to magic. I'm just going to cheese it with magic. So I don't want to knock it too much because I cheesed it. It's not the boss's fault. It was just kind of how I played it. So I loved this boss. I thought it was really cool. Like I said, it has some really heavy hitting attacks, and it's just overall a cool design. And so I'm going to give it B tier. Again, I wouldn't argue with somebody if they told me it was A tier. S tier might be a little bit high for me, but just my overall personal experience with this, I cheesed it, and so it was kind of a forgettable boss battle. So I'm gonna kind of spoil the rest of the video a bit, but the next boss, Flamelurker, is my favorite boss of this game. He looks so badass. The level design is really cool. He is also very aggressive, so the Armor Spider cheese strat of just kind of sitting back and hitting with Soul Arrow won't really work. He is vulnerable to magic, and so I was able to beat him by just shooting him with Soul Arrow, but he has another phase where he gets even more uber aggressive. And honestly, one of the reasons why I love Flamelurker, other than the fact that he's a badass and the level design is really cool, after I beat Flamelurker, I finally felt like a quote-unquote real Soulsborne player, because everything I know about these games, the bosses take a lot of trial and error. You got to figure out their strengths and their weaknesses, got to figure out when to attack and when to roll away, kind of what I was talking about with Tower Knight. In my experience up until this point, other than Tower Knight, I've been able to beat every single one of these bosses, other than Vanguard, I guess, but that's a tutorial boss, in one try pretty easily. Now, again, Armor Spider is not an easy boss. I was just able to cheese it. So Flamelurker was the first one where I felt like, oh man, the game is actually really, really difficult, and I'm gonna have to do that trial and error thing and figure out its strengths and weaknesses. And so that was the first time I really felt like a Soulsborne player. When I got to Flamelurker, I actually had to figure some stuff out. I had to try different strats, I tried different rings, and then when I finally beat him, I felt so satisfying. And I started to understand why everybody loves these games so much. So I'm gonna put him in S tier. He may or may not be the only S tier boss I have for the rest of the list, but he is definitely my favorite. So there might be some up in the same tier, but he's definitely my favorite. So like Armored Spider, the next boss I want to talk about, Dragon God, might get me in a little bit of trouble with the Soulsborne community. I think that he's a boss that you're probably either in love with him, like I am, spoiler alert, I guess, or you hate him. And like I said, I really, really enjoyed this boss. It's not super hard. It's kind of an atypical boss in Demon Souls just because of the sheer size of Dragon God. Obviously, you can't fight him with a conventional weapon. It's a stealth fight for sure. You kind of just have to throw on the Thief's Ring and sneak around and shoot him with those big arrows. Therefore, he's not going to be everybody's cup of tea. But for me, he was kind of a breath of fresh air. As much as I love this game, it would not have felt the same, and it definitely would have gotten stale if there weren't bosses like Dragon God to kind of mix it up. Plus, it looks really cool, and he taught me how useful the rings were, especially the Thief's Ring, because at this point I hadn't really messed with them too much. A little bit with Flamelurker, but I hadn't really messed with them that much, and so Dragon God kind of taught me that lesson as well. So I'm gonna put him in A tier. So the next boss I want to talk about, Fool's Idol, is kind of a forgettable one. I'm not going to have much to say about her just because beat her on my first try, and as I was kind of thinking about this tier list, it was one that I just honestly forgot was even in the game. She's not bad by any stretch, just kind of forgettable for me because she's so easy. Again, I beat her in my first try. The floor traps are cool, the church is cool. The idea of her being able to create copies of herself is also very interesting, but there's a trick to figuring out if you're fighting a copy or if you're fighting her. And once you figure that out, which I figured it out very quickly because I'm always targeting things before I attack them. If you target one of her copies, it's going to have a health bar. If you target her, it's not going to have a health bar. And so once you're able to figure that out, it's kind of a piece of cake boss battle. So despite having all of those other advantages that I talked about, again, Fool's Idol is pretty forgettable. She's going to be C tier above Vanguard, but she, again, kind of got lost in the shuffle for me as far as this game, because there's a lot of really, really cool bosses. So I did spoil that Flamelurker was my favorite boss, and I'm going to do the same thing with my least favorite boss, Maneater. Man, I hated this boss so much. I would fight Phalanx 1,000 times before I fought Maneater again. And I know I can already see the get good comments coming right now, but I don't care that this boss is hard, because that's what I expect all the bosses in this game to be. It was the fact that a lot of these bosses are difficult in a more organic way. Maneater is clearly artificially hard, and I kind of talked about this a little bit with Tower Knight. It's clear to me now that I've beaten the entire game that the developers wanted to at least try to balance some of these bosses out. They give certain bosses different things to kind of balance out the difficulty. I don't think they do an amazing job, because there's a couple of bosses coming up that I thought were very, very easy. But Maneater, if you're just fighting Maneater one-on-one on a regular fucking platform, he might be the easiest boss in the entire game. I did not struggle with Maneater whatsoever. It was the tiny ass platform, and it was the fact that you had to fight two of them. It was artificially hard. They knew that they didn't design this boss very well. That's why they made you fight him on a tiny platform. That's why they made you fight two of them. And to make matters worse, he's not even that cool looking. He's just a hairy gargoyle. I will give them credit. The snake tail looks pretty badass. I'm a fan of spiders, but I'm also a fan of snakes. That snake tail does look really cool. But outside of that, it's just a lame ass boss. Plus, the AI is absolute trash. I talked about the Thief's Ring earlier. I did play this boss with the Thief's Ring on, and honestly, you almost kind of have to, because you don't want to have to fight both of them at the same time because you don't have much room to operate on this tiny ass platform. But the AI is so trash in this boss fight that there are times where I would just sit there and wait, and both Maneaters would just be flying around doing nothing because they couldn't like locate me because of the Thief's Ring. And so it's like, damn if you do, damn if you don't type of situation with the Thief's Ring. So this boss battle from start to finish was so frustrating. There are so many bosses. I would say probably 75% of the bosses I beat in one try. It probably took me more tries to beat Maneater than it did all of the other bosses combined. And it wasn't even satisfyingly difficult. It was just artificially difficult. I don't want to yuck anybody's yum. If you like Maneater, that's cool. Continue to like him. I'm just some noob on the internet that doesn't know what the hell he's talking about. But my opinion is it's a trash boss. So it's going to be F tier. Again, kind of like what I was saying with Flamelurker, I don't think that it's going to be the only S tier or the only F tier in this particular case. We'll have to find out. But it is by far my least favorite boss. So like I said, I really struggled with Maneater, and I had to kind of take a break from him for a while. So I decided to go back to World 1 and I moved on to Penetrator, and I was honestly really excited for this boss. I never played this game before, but I had seen some of these bosses. I had watched Twitch streams in the past of other people playing this game, and this boss looked so cool to me. His armor, his bloody sword, the fact that he killed that fat piece of shit. I was all for this boss. Unfortunately, he was pretty easy, especially considering it took me so long to get to him. His level to get to him, like kind of the lead up to him, was really hard. Probably the longest it took me to get to any of these bosses outside of maybe Phalanx, because I was just so trash at the game. But he's such a slow boss, and all of his moves are so deliberate that it's so easy to just roll away and hit him with Soul Arrow. That's pretty much what I did the entire boss. Therefore, I can't really give him a very high score. Like I said before, I don't want everything that I talk about to be about the difficulty of the boss. Again, I still think that he was cool. He killed the fat guy, and I absolutely hated that guy. His bloody sword was really cool. So I would definitely give him a better score. Honestly, I think that he's the tops of C tier. I would give him like a C+, so a little bit higher than Tower Knight. So after the Penetrator fight, I realized I was about to fight the final boss, so I had to backtrack. Didn't want to try Maneater again, so I decided to go to the 4th Archstone. And all 3 of these bosses are all pretty easy. So for the sake of trying to make this video as short as possible, I'm going to kind of do all 3 of them rapid fire. The first being Adjudicator. Now you're supposed to go down the ramp. He has this like giant sword in his side, and you're supposed to hit that. Then he falls down. You hit the bird on top of his head and rinse and repeat. However, I cheesed it with, you probably already guessed, Soul Arrow. I stayed up top, hit the bird with the Soul Arrow a bunch of times. He does have this big hammer and tongue attack that he can hit you with if you stay up top, but they're all pretty easy to avoid. Old Hero is a kind of a cool idea. He's this big boy, but he's blind, so he has to track you by the sound that you make. But throw on the Thief's Ring like I talked about earlier, and he's really easy to avoid. And finally, Storm King. It looks really cool. He's just this giant stingray looking boss, and he has all these little mini copies, kind of like Fool's Idol or Phalanx earlier. But the mini-me's are pretty easy. Just hit them with Soul Ring or a bow and arrow, and they die pretty quickly. And then once it's just you and the big boy, you get the special sword in the middle and a couple hits with that, and he's done. So Storm King for me is low B tier. I think I would put it right below Armor Spider. And I think the other 2 I would put Adjudicator above Tower Knight, and then maybe Old Hero above Fool's Idol, in between Tower Knight and Fool's Idol. All right, so if it wasn't for Maneater, Leechmonger, the next boss I'm going to talk about, would be my least favorite boss of this game. If you think Phalanx is bad, like I do, let me introduce you to a suckier version of that boss. It literally took me longer to go down the ramp to get to Leechmonger than it did for me to kill it. Throw some pine resin on your weapon and just start whacking away, and it's dead before you know it. It does have an interesting ability to be able to heal itself, but you kill it so quickly it doesn't really matter. So I am going to throw this in F tier above Maneater, of course, because Maneater is my least favorite boss of this game. So it's going to be F tier, but if there was like an F plus, that's where Leechmonger would be. So the next boss I'm going to talk about real quickly, it's another forgettable one, and that is Dirty Colossus. Literally the level to get to Dirty Colossus is far cooler and more memorable than the actual boss itself. Dirty Colossus does look cooler than Phalanx and Leechmonger and isn't quite as easy, but only by like a little bit. I died once fighting him, but that was only because I got caught up in a swamp kind of in the corner, and he was able just to bash me, because if you've played this game, you know that you can't roll when you're in a swamp. So I kind of just got caught in this weird corner of the area, and so he was able to kill me once, but he's not really that hard. He does have this insect bullet move that he does, but it's really easy to avoid. Just kind of very similar to Leechmonger, where it's just like you just kind of bash away, and before you know it, he's dead. So I'm gonna put him D tier. I would put him above Phalanx. So not a great boss. All right, so I only have a few bosses left. The next one I want to talk about, Maiden Astria, is another one very similar to Dragon God. I think you're either gonna love her or hate her, but like Dragon God, I really enjoyed her fight. First of all, she's super easy to beat. You don't actually fight her, you fight her champion, and he's kind of just like this big knight character, very similar to a lot of other knight characters that you fight throughout this game. He has like this big hammer type of weapon that he swings at you and it kind of staggers him, very similar to like the shield bash with Tower Knight, and you just get out of the way of the actual attack, wait for it to stagger him, hit him a few times, and rinse and repeat. So the boss battle itself, the actual fight, is really easy. But I like the idea that you always assume that you're the hero in your own story and you're the good guy, especially when you play a video game. And her story, she basically kind of plants that seed that you might not be that good. It reminded me very similar to the story of Shadow of the Colossus. Like, you aren't the hero in that story. And I think that idea is really interesting. And she kind of plants that seed. So based on that, I really enjoyed this particular boss. Like I said with Dragon God, I think that Maiden Astria is not going to be everybody's cup of tea, but I really enjoyed her story, and just the idea of like fighting a champion is really interesting to me. So I would put her above Armor Spider. So she's a B plus boss for me. So speaking of fighting somebody's champion, the next boss I want to talk about, Old Monk, is very similar. You don't actually fight him, you fight his champion. And after finally beating Maneater, I was able to move on to Old Monk. And what's really cool about Old Monk is your kind of mileage is gonna vary on this fight. If you're playing offline, his champion's just gonna be kind of like this AI generated bot that's very easy to beat. That was my experience. But if you're playing online, he actually summons another actual player. And at this point in the game, this game has already been out for a few years. You're probably playing somebody very, very good at this game, very dedicated to this game. So again, your mileage may vary on this fight. So I actually was playing this online, but it took me so long to go up the stairs that he was summoning in actual players, but by the time I got to them, they were already gone. They got summoned to a different world. So I actually ended up fighting an AI bot, which is a little bit disappointing, but the idea of Old Monk is really cool to me. It reminded me of how I assumed that most people that played this when it first came out had a similar experience that I did when I played Metal Gear Solid, and I had that Psycho Mantis fight for the first time, and then he can read your memory card and like he talks shit to you about the games that you played. That was such a cool idea, and I'd imagine when this game, the original game, first came out, it was a similar experience for players. So again, my actual boss fight with Old Monk wasn't amazing, but I really thought that this was such a cool idea. And it is kind of tough to get to him. Like I said, I struggled to get up those stairs with those like Mind Flayer type of prison guard characters that are really tough for me. So it did take me a while. So I'm going to put him right below Dragon God. I just think that he's such a cool idea of a boss, but the actual fight, my experience with that fight is pretty forgettable. All right, so the last boss that I want to talk about is obviously the final boss of the game, and that is Old King Allant. So for the most part, I had a lot of expectations going into this game, and this game managed to at least meet my expectations or exceed my expectations. And really the only area that they didn't at least meet my expectations was with the final boss. I was honestly surprised at how easy Old King was. Now, I'm not necessarily saying that it was an easy boss to beat. He's not easy. He hits hard. It took me a few tries to actually beat him. But once you get the groove of his moveset, it's kind of something that I was talking a little bit about with Flamelurker, is with Demon Souls in these Soulsborne games, you kind of have to trial and error and figure out how to attack each boss. And Old King, once you figure out his attacks, he's pretty easy. And it's not necessarily cheese, because I still think that it has a little bit of skill involved, but I felt really comfortable once I figured out the groove. Now there's really three main attacks with Old King. One, which is really interesting, is he can suck the soul levels out of you, which is such a cool idea, because you can actually, as the longer the fight goes, the worse you could actually be. And so I think that's an interesting concept, but it's a pretty easy move to avoid, so I didn't really get hit. I think he might have gotten me one time with it, but that was it. The two other main moves is he has this really quick lunge attack. If you get too far away from him, it's going to institute his lunge attack, but actually that's the attack you want, because once you get the idea of it, it's pretty easy to dodge it, and then it stuns him for a second, and that's when you're going to get your hits in. So you actually want him to do that move. And then the other move he does, he kind of does this charge up move with this wind, and it hits for a very long distance, but it actually helps you because it takes so long for him to charge it up. It's easy to avoid it, but also you could heal up. So if you didn't dodge the lunge attack very well last time, you don't have to worry, because he's going to do that charge attack and you could heal up while he's doing it. And it almost kind of gets you into that rhythm, because he's going to do the lunge attack, you avoid it, you get your couple hits in, you roll away far enough that it's going to he's going to start up his charge attack. You're already super far away from him, so you can heal up if you need to, and then because you're so far away from him, he's going to do his lunge attack again, and it's just rinse and repeat. So again, he's not super easy. He does hit hard, and he does have that soul sucking ability, but I was surprised at how easy he was, because for a final boss in a Soulsborne game, I just assumed that he was going to be super difficult. I will say that he's still a pretty cool boss. Like I said, the soul sucking ability is interesting. And he does hit hard when he does hit you, and he does have a couple of different moves. So he's not a terrible boss, but I would definitely put him low A tier. All right, beautiful YouTube people, that's it. That is my Demon Souls boss tier list. You're still here, so you obviously enjoyed the video. Definitely give it a thumbs up. smash that like button, as some people say, and then also consider subscribing and dinging that bell. That helps me out a lot. Obviously, I'm planning on posting a gaming related video every Friday, so I have a couple of videos in the pipeline that I'm excited about. So if you like this type of content, definitely give me a subscription and ding that bell. So until then, I'm Patty McNinja. Take it easy, guys. What's up, YouTube people? It's your boy Patty McNinja, and this is my boy Yoshi, aka Kitty Boy. And we were just talking, and we agree that since you made it this far in the video, you might as well subscribe. You wouldn't want to disappoint Kitty Boy, would you?